can start. So my name is Nurit Viesel-Nordmeyer. I'm currently based at the Cognitive Neuroscientific Research Center in Lyon in France, but still related with the TU Dortmund University in Germany. And I'm happy to introduce you now to our symposium, focusing grammar skills and mathematical achievements by trying an explanatory attempt. So today we will have 3 talks regarding this important topic, and at the end a discussion of David Purpura from the Purdue University in West Lafayette. And in the first talk I will focusing on the specific role of grammar skills for mathematical learning based on 5 different studies of the last years, 5 behavioral studies, and adding some first results of 1 brain imaging studies. And following, Eva Wimmer and Alexander Röhm will give us an insight in the first results of a systematic review, focusing the relations between children's grammatical skills and math learning. And finally, Tomoya Nakai will talk with us about the shared syntactic processing for language and arithmetic in the brain based on brain imaging studies. And before I now will start with my talk, just let me say a few words. So the motivation to compose the symposium is building up of my last year's examining the relation between language, math, and working memory. And to do so, it occurs to me that a lot of studies examining the mathematical learning, including vocabulary skills, when they're interested in the relation with language skills. However, there are a lack of studies considering grammar skills, and the few studies I could find show which considering grammar skills, examining math skills, show very interesting results. And so this was the motivation for this symposium today. And now let me start with my talk regarding the specific role of grammar skills for mathematical learning. So, as I mentioned before, grammar skills play a specific role in math learning. So this we could find based on a few recent studies. And this was especially also shown for different groups of learning. So children with second and with first and second language acquisition, or children with and without language delays. For these groups of children, it could shown that for mathematical learning, grammar skills play a unique play a unique role, and by focusing at the same time on different language skills like phonological awareness or REN. And the authors of the mentioned studies draw the conclusion from this result that grammar and math are perhaps constrained by a universal grammar. And moreover, there is also a study from David, which we'll discuss today, our symposium, and his colleagues. And by examining the relation between general language, so based on a vocabulary measurement, and mathematical learning, they found when they include a specific mathematical language construct, which was developed by them, that the influence of the general language was lost, and there was just the influence of the specific mathematical language construct which remained. And so there seems to be a specific role of this specific mathematical language construct compared to vocabulary skills for math learning. And in this construct, which also described with words like lot, more, or near, the relation between quantities or numbers, so also prepositions, comparatives, or superlatives are included. And so we can say this is also a hint or an indirect hint that grammar skills play a specific role for math skills. And based on all this knowledge, our research question is if there is a specific role of grammar skills in math learning in general, especially comparing to other language skills. And for this, I will show you results based on different studies. So first, 5 behavioral studies for which we used data, first of the German National Educational Panel Study, spanning age 4 to 10, and second on a smaller German panel study, but with more differentiated language measurements. So you can see this here. And for a better understanding of the results of these 5 studies, we will add the first results of an ongoing project by adding brain imaging studies to this. So, but let me first show you our results of the behavioral studies. And first, from the first and second behavioral studies, so based on the German National Educational Panel Study. And you can see first here on the left side in our box that we are comparing different groups of learners. So children with different mathematical requirements in preschool age, with low achievement, average achievement, and high achievement. And you can see here with the highlighted line, these are the children with the low math achievement, and comparing to the other groups, there seems to be a consistent development pattern of the group differences. So this means the group differences leads early in preschool age seems to remain until primary school age. And when you look at the right box, we are comparing children with combined learning difficulties, math learning difficulties, language difficulties, and the typical achieving peers. And there seems to be also nearly a consistent development pattern. So the preschool and late differences between these groups, there's just a small jump, but they also fall back. So the mathematical low achievement group. And also in this study, it remains until primary school age. Though this was for the math development, and in vocabulary development, when you're focusing on the highlighted line, you can see that there is nearly no significant changes in the development for the children with low math achievement. So they also started with the lowest level for vocabulary. But however, and this is a very important result, the children with low math achievement, so in both studies, they decreased in their grammatical development by enrollment in primary school age. And in the third studies, so again, please just focus on the highlighted results because there are there's a lot of effects in our past analysis. But what I like to show you is that when we are comparing the influence from vocabulary and grammar skills on math skills, grammar skills, the effect is still stronger. And there is even a long way influence. So also the early grammar skills have still a direct effect on math skills in later primary school age. So grammar plays again a specific role, and we were able to repeat the same based on the data of our smaller German panel study, though there's no direct influence from vocabulary, just phonological awareness and grammar, but grammar is still strong. And for this relation between grammar and math skills, so the specific role of grammar skills when we're looking on language and math skills, we assume that we could explain this by the required skills in understanding rules, which is necessary on the one hand for grammar skills, on the other hand for math skills. But however, based on the behavioral results I have shown you before, we were not able to really clarify which are the actually underlying processes. And thus, we are thinking that the addition of brain imaging method is informative. And this is the ongoing project. So we added, so I will show you in the following our first results by adding the brain imaging studies by doing VBM analysis. And this is also a smaller samples from the Cognitive Neuroscientific Research Center in France, in Lyon, children between age 8 and 14. And let us first have a look at the correlation. And what you can see, we can confirm our results from before. So there seems to be again a specific role of grammar skills. And when you look more in detail, we were able to differentiate between receptive grammar skills and expressive grammar skills. And you can see in line with the NEPS data, there's again the specific role of the receptive grammar skills and children's math skills. So this is also in line, for example, with from the theoretical part with a few studies from T. Clemens and colleagues, which show this for the different groups of learning. And let us now go to our BBM analysis. And however, until now, based on, so we are now ongoing in our analysis, and based on our small study, we just could find significant effects for the grammar skills. So for the gray matter as a function of skills. And I will show you this in the following. So this means for the increase in gray matter as a function of the increase in grammar skills. And we could find in the left hemisphere first significant areas for the superior temporal gyrus, for the inferior parietal cortex and the supramarginal gyrus, and on the right hemisphere for the insular and the inferior frontal gyrus. And as I mentioned before, until now, we were not able to find the overlapping effect, also with significant areas for the math skills. But we are looking in a lot of recent studies, so latest studies, and they show that especially these areas, which we could find as significant, are involved in math skills. So here in the right hemisphere for the calculation task, or in the left hemisphere for number task, subtraction, multiplication. And even one recent study shows that especially these areas are impaired in children with dyscalculia. And even more, there are a few studies which point, especially for these areas, which we could find as recognized as significant, a relation between math and language skills. So first, by Nakai and colleagues, we will hear more about this in the following for the syntax structure of math, or by Thompson and colleagues for the representation in number words. And finally, in the right hemisphere, an overlapping between reading and math, and the reading instrument was also a measurement of reading comprehension, so nearly similar to our grammar comprehension task. So as I mentioned, this is an ongoing project, and we are now included, especially this receptive grammar measurement, which is also used in the German National Panel study, in our ongoing assessment, which started with the repeated measurement now in September. And we will go on with looking in existing data sets, 3 existing data sets with different age spans, to better explain and understand the relation between language and math skills by the underlying structure, so based on gray matter. Okay, thank you for your attention. So, and I suggest if there are some comprehension questions, we can do it now, and when not, we will go on, because yes, we have an eye on the time. I think we will go now to Eva and Alexander's presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nurit. Just starting to share my screen. I hope everybody can see.
Yes.
I'm sharing.
Yes.
Okay, I have to get my controls right. Okay. Thank you, Nurit, for the introduction and organizing this wonderful symposium. I'm Alexander Röhm, and together with Eva Wimmer, I want to present to you our preliminary findings from our systematic review on the relation between children's grammatical skills and mathematical learning. So we already heard a lot about the general connection between language and math from Nurit's talk, and I'm sorry, I switched my mic off. And our first starting point was the recent meta-analysis by Peng and colleagues, which identified from about 300 studies that there is a general influence of language skills on mathematical competencies. And we further know that especially children's grammatical skills are linked to their mathematical learning in preschool and primary school. And from other previous studies, which Nurit just presented, we also know that grammatical deficits in preschool children with weak mathematical skills persist until primary school age compared to their peers. So, and from other previous studies we did on the subgroup of children with DLD, we know that there is also a strong connection between language impairments and mathematical competencies. So children with developmental language disorders who have often grammar deficits show lower mathematical skills than their typically developing peers. And further, a previous study we conducted shows that especially grammatical skills of children with and without DLD appear to be strongly connected with specific basic mathematical competencies like quantity operations and quantity comparisons. So we kind of identified, to sum it up, a need for a systematic review to find out how specific grammatical and math skills are intertwined. What are the aims of our systematic review? First, we want to identify aspects of expressive and receptive grammar, morphology and syntax that are reported to be significantly related to mathematical skills like numeracy, arithmetic. And further, we want to take a look at other additional factors like working memory or neuropsychological aspects that are also investigated in the studies, which could be discussed as possible causes for the assumed associations. So we conducted a systematic review, or still conducting a systematic review following the PRISMA guidelines. And we searched with 41 English and 52 German keywords in title, abstract, and keywords in the following databases for studies until April 21, and had the following inclusion criteria, like children should be from kindergarten to elementary or primary school age, like up to about 11 years, or US grades 1 to 5, or in Germany classes 1 to 4. They all had to be monolingual and had to show typical language acquisition or developmental language impairment. And the publication type we included were English or German peer-reviewed journal articles, chapters, or dissertations. And we excluded studies that only looked on children with primary disorders like intellectual disabilities, autism, or hearing impairment, something like that. So let me give you an overview about our screening process. We started our search and had a total number of research articles of about 35,537. And we automatically excluded about 7,000 duplicates. And then we started manually title screening in all screening steps, when there was an undecisiveness in the decision, we double checked all our decisions or other titles and abstracts and so on. So we started title screening the 28,000 something articles, and excluded about 14,000 of them because there were still duplicates or no language or math involved, regarding from the title, irrelevant publication types, or not in English or German. Then we started abstract screening about the remaining titles. And then in this step, we also included the studies from the Peng meta-analysis we had identified as relevant to our topic. In the screening of the abstracts, we again excluded about 12,600 further titles that also showed no regard to language or math, had different target group, errand, publication type, or were not in English and German. And currently, we are in the process of the full text screening of the remaining 1,700, because there are still some recodings going on, so the number might be a bit higher here. And our exclusion criteria are a different target group, no grammar or math measures, on no primary data, again, the language, and no correlational data. So currently we have a total number of included studies of 65, about which Eva will tell you a bit more what's in them so far.
Thank you, Alexander. So I will give you some insights on our preliminary analysis of these 65 papers we included so far. So this is a brief overview how the study samples look like. So as you can see, the majority of studies included children with typical development, so with no other disorders. Then a few studies, so to be exact, 10 studies included children with developmental language disorders. Only a few studies encompassed children with mathematical difficulties, MD, and we had also a few studies who included both children with language disorders and children with mathematical difficulties, or children having both these disorders. And we had also some studies that investigated children with various other disorders, but that also entailed a control group of children with typical development. So we also considered these studies for our purpose. Okay. Looking on. Yeah. And this slide shows the number of studies which depend on various types of grammar and mathematical measures, as you can see here. And so, to be short about it, most studies used differentiated tests or test batteries on grammar and mathematical measures. So with respect to grammar, those studies considered expressive or receptive tests, both of them. And we also had 12 studies that had a diagnostic score, with 9 of them had general global score for language, but who also considered grammar. But in the other case, it was unclear if grammar was tested or not. Okay. You can go on. Yeah, and there's of course need to further specify these measures and relations. Okay, now we thought it would be good to give you some first insights from relevant studies. So we show you 4 relevant studies here. The first one is a study Nurit already mentioned in her talk, the study by David Purpura and Aaron E. Reid from 2016. And of course, this study does not directly test grammar, but it includes these construct Nurit mentioned mathematical language. So a test where the children have to understand keywords that are used in early mathematics, and these keywords that represent function words like prepositions, comparatives, or superlatives like nearest, fewest. So that these words entail morphological processing. So it was very interesting that these authors found that only this kind of mathematical language was a significant predictor of numeracy skills and not vocabulary. So this highlights the role of grammar in contrast to other language domains. You can go on. Now I show you results of a very recent study from this year by Cho and colleagues. who tested children with mathematical difficulties and children without mathematical difficulties. And they included different measures of grammar, morphology measures, and syntax measures. And they found that children with mathematical disabilities perform significantly lower on syntax compared to their peers without any difficulties. And this, but this does not hold for vocabulary or for morphology. And so this study highlights the specific role of syntax within the grammar component. Okay, and Nurit already mentioned the very recent study she conducted also these longitudinal data, which are very interesting, but I will show you two studies who also were longitudinal studies and who were relevant in our 65 papers. And the first is by Paul and colleagues, and they found that in children at the age of 2 who were followed up at age 8, that those children in this sample who did not yet produce word combinations at age 2, that they were likely to have 3 times, they were 3 times more likely to have weak mathematical skills at age 8. And this was a very interesting finding. And the last study is an interesting Chinese study by Liu and colleagues from 2016, and they investigated young children in kindergarten at their 2nd and 3rd year. And they were interested in the counting skills of these children. And a peculiarity in Chinese is that number words like 11 are constructed by combining 2 morphemes. So 11 is 10-1 and 12 is 10-2. And they also examined a compound building test, and they found out that these morphological skills, so the skill to build compound nouns like cupcake, for example, that those skills predicted the children's counting abilities 1 year later. So in other words, inferior morphological difficulties might be one reason for weak counting skills in Chinese. Okay, so to sum up, our study is the first systematic review on this connection between specific grammatical and math skills. And from our preliminary analysis, we can say that most studies encompass children with a typical development, whereas some target children with developmental language disorders, and only a few studies, at least those studies we screened so far, considered children with mathematical difficulties. And there were only a few longitudinal studies in the data set. Okay, now we also found some limitations in analyzing the data. So often no explicit grammar measures was used, only some global language score, as I told you before. And often these samples were very heterogeneous. So they included also children with other difficulties, intellectual disabilities, or they included bilingual children or children with dyslexia. So without reporting separate results on these groups. And in some, there were only few studies that report the direct relations between grammar skills and mathematical learning in terms of correlation analysis or regression analysis. Okay. However, there are we can confirm with our first insights and also with the facts we know from Nurit that there is really seems to be a close relation between grammar and mathematical development. So and for one, morphological skills might be relevant for the use of mathematical language, and then receptive syntactic skills might be a key factor for success in mathematical learning. So receptive syntax might facilitate the accurate comprehension of the teacher's mathematical instructions in the classroom. And we also have to consider language-specific effects, which we know from the Chinese studies, that we have to also consider this aspect. So all in all, we think that's a really promising new research area with the aim to better understand these complex links between these two domains. And in doing that, we can identify some specific skills that might help also in the intervention of children with mathematical difficulties and children with developmental language disorders. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva and Alexander, for the interesting talk. And when there are no questions to better understand the talk before, I think we should go on to Tomoya's talk because of the running time.
Okay. Can you all see my slide?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you, Eva and Alexander, for the nice presentation. And thank you for Nurit for inviting me in this symposium, in this presentation, I will talk about my previous studies using functional MRI, the neural basis of language and arithmetics. Although these studies are all with adult subjects, but I think that I believe that this will be very informative for those who are interested in the relationship between language and arithmetic. So first I have to define what is syntax here. And there are many symbolic sequences. Humans use many symbolic sequences, language, sentences, and also mathematical equations or code progression in music. And what is the basic property and in common? First, there are acceptable and unacceptable sequences, or in other words, grammatical and ungrammatical sequences. And second, the sequences are produced by a set of rules, which indicate how different symbols are combined. So this set of rules is called as grammar. And in theoretical linguistics, such symbolic sequences are described by hierarchical tree structure. Well, I present here maybe the most famous sentences created by Noam Chomsky. It's meaningless, but it's grammatically correct, right? And it's all of each element are combined one by one and to make whole sentences, and it's described by tree structure. And based on this idea, we can find the similar syntactic structure in a language and arithmetic. And for these examples, those words or sentences and arithmetic expression have right branching structure. That means two elements on the right side are combined first and combined to the leftmost part and to make whole sentence or arithmetic expression. So the research question here, the human brain have a shared system for language and arithmetic for the process, especially for the processing and syntactic structure. To answer this question, we performed 3 studies. In the study 1, we tested whether the brain activation is modulated by syntactic complexity in the arithmetic problems. In the study 2, we tested whether there is a syntactic interaction between language and arithmetic. In study 3, we examined the lateralization patterns of brain activity for 2 domains. So we also had to think about what brain region can be a candidate for language and arithmetic. Using the meta-analysis based on the previous studies and previous neuroimaging studies targeting language and arithmetic, we can find that yellow region on the left hemisphere, inferior frontal gyrus IFG, can be a target of both language and arithmetic. And in the following slides, I will mainly focus on this region, IFG. In the study 1, the 20 subjects performed a series of different arithmetic tasks and with different syntactic complexity. Well, because of the time limit, I don't explain each task in detail, but the important thing is that they had a different syntactic structure. For example, in a simple calculation task, participant performed addition and subtraction separately, but in a linear sequence task, participant first half performed the subtraction, and they use the result of subtraction to the first addition, and that makes a more complex syntactic structure for the calculation. And we found that in the left inferior frontal gyrus, activation in the left inferior frontal gyrus increased with the complexity of syntactic structure. That means the task when they perform the task with more complex syntactic structure, they had larger activation in this region. So in the study 2, we presented the participant consecutively sentences and arithmetic questions with the same structure or different structure. That means in the congruent pairs, both sentence and arithmetic expression had a left branching structure or right branching structure. But in incongruent pairs, if the sentence had left branching and right arithmetic expression had right branching, or sentence had right branching and arithmetic expression had left branching. So comparing these congruent incongruent pairs, we expected that the activation in the left frontal IFG, left inferior frontal gyrus, reflect this kind of interaction effect. And as expected, we found the interaction effect in this bilateral IFG, and we found the syntactic adaptation effect. That means brain activation decreased when participants solved the arithmetic equation and sentences with the same structure consecutively. The brain activation decreased. And this region is the same actually this study is bilateral, but it's the same, basically same brain part as the study 1. So in the study 3, is a bit a different point because we focused on the brain lateralization pattern. So what is the brain lateralization? And it is well known that especially in the right-handers, the brain activation is on the left hemisphere and larger activation when they process the language tasks. But it is also known that activation patterns are more variable and for non-right-handers. So there are both participants who had right activation in the right hemisphere, and also a participant that had activation in the left hemisphere for language processing. So what about arithmetic? And we recruited 30 non-right-handers, and they performed language and arithmetic tasks and also control working memory tasks. And so we found that for right dominant subject, the participant who showed right activation in the right hemisphere for language task also showed activation in the right hemisphere for arithmetic task. And participant who showed the activation in the left side for the language task also showed the activation in the left side for arithmetic task. And when we quantify the laterality index for language and arithmetic, we found the positive correlation of laterality index between language and arithmetic task and the region around the inferior frontal gyrus. So we summarize these 3 studies. What we found, the left activation in the left inferior gyrus, IFG was modulated by syntactic structure of arithmetic problems. And second study, bilateral IFG reflects the syntactic interaction between language and arithmetic. And study 3, the lateralization patterns of language and arithmetic are correlated and in the region around IFG. So Based on this observation, we conclude that the human adults have shared neural basis predominant in the FG for syntactic processing in language and arithmetic. So this is the end of my slide, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tomoya, for your interesting talk. And if there are no understanding questions, I think we will go to our discussion of David now.
All right, let me just, there it is. Okay, so I have a few slides I'm gonna try to quickly run through to make sure that we have some time, but I want to try to tie these three wonderful sets of studies together. And I say sets of studies because one of the things I really appreciated was the integration within each of the talks of multiple studies to help us get to a better understanding of the links between grammar and language and early mathematics skills. So these are the three talks. I don't need to do that. One of the things that I want to bring this image up again because I think it really speaks well to the overall connections across these talks. There are links between math and grammar or language more broadly, but they are specific links and they may happen at specific times. They're shared components across these domains, but there are also unique components. And I think a big part of our goals as researchers is to figure out where and when those shared links happen, and what are the unique components within each domain as well. So a couple of things one of the things I really wanted to highlight that I really appreciated about the symposium was that there were three different broad approaches to addressing the same broader topic. We had multiple large-scale behavioral data sets with a systematic review and fMRI brain imaging approaches that are all attempting to answer these broader questions about the links between domains. And I think that's something that we as a field need to think more broadly about. How can we collaborate and use information from across these domains to address these big questions in mathematics development and learning. So some of the key findings that I wanted to highlight and raise some questions about, or not questions about the findings, but where do those findings lead us? First, in talk one, grammar or syntax. One of the things that I think we need to have a discussion about is where's that overlap in language constructs of grammar, syntax, morphology, etc. But is mathematical language actually a form of grammar and syntax? And how can we differentiate that from mathematical vocabulary? Because I've been thinking a lot, talking with Sarah Powell and others about early on what we've termed mathematical language. Words like more, many, most, a lot are these connector words. Whereas later on when we're talking about math vocabulary, we're really talking more about name terms, names of shapes, names of attributes, and these function differently. They're different types of language. And so how do those work in terms of, or differently in terms of the connections with language structures? In the systematic review in talk two, there do appear to be clear links between grammar and language, at least at the preliminary stages. And I'm certain that there will be once everything's done as well. But what about other language and literacy factors, such as print and phonological awareness? Joanne Lefebvre's pathways model has three core pathways. One is the linguistic pathway, but what is that made of? What are the which aspects of language and literacy really function in that pathway, and when do those different components play a role in mathematical development? And then finally, in the third talk, one of my questions that arises from this is this universal? Are there universal links between math and language and literacy, or are there specific components of math, such as specifically arithmetic and language? Does this cross all the different aspects of mathematics and language? I really appreciated this breakdown of the syntax and the links between the syntax of sentences and mathematical problems. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years, and this image really broke it down. But I think we also should be thinking about how this functions across other aspects of language and literacy, such as print knowledge. I don't know if you can see in the bottom corner of my whiteboard next to the drawings by my 5-year-olds. I have this actual breakdown here that I drew from my postdocs and grad students of how letter names or how letters and numbers have this very similar structure of there's this somewhat arbitrary symbol that has a name, and both have a meaning. In the case of letters, it's a sound. In the case of numbers, it's a quantity. There are shared links there that map nicely across language and literacy, that also, when we get to older ages with sentence structure and arithmetic sentences, there are also shared links there. And how can we break these down and think about them in sort of a unified way? So I also have some broad general next directions, things to think about. First, I think we need to think about the distinctions within both math and language domains. For example, within math, we have counting, relations, arithmetic reasoning, numeral knowledge, a whole host of other areas. And in language, there's grammar, syntax, morphology, phonological awareness, vocabulary, print knowledge. How do all of these, if they do, how do they connect across these two domains? Also, how does the role of grammar, syntax, morphology change across languages? Because not many languages have very different structures, especially when it comes to mathematical terminology. We have some languages with an inverted tens digit. We have other languages that switch to base 20 language, such as French, in later count or in counting up past 60. With some languages that have more transparent numbering once you get past 10. And so, how are these universals across languages, and what is sort of language dependent? Then also, can we measure mathematics specific grammar? Is there mathematics specific grammar, or is it just really functionally part of the broader syntactical and grammatical structures of language in general? And then finally, what factors might explain the relations between these structural similarities? Could it be something like executive functioning that has been shown to link across or link to both math and to language comprehension? So these are some things that I wanted to throw out there, but we can now move to having a discussion. It can be about these topics or about questions about the studies, but I wanted to raise some of these thoughts. I also want to acknowledge I really enjoyed reading through these three sets of studies in advance and hearing them today. I'm excited to see what else is to come from these, especially the systematic review. Once that's finished, I think that'll be really neat to see what comes from there. It's a tremendous load with that number of studies to code and everything. So it's not an area that I'm going to venture into myself, because I see how much work that is. But I want to thank all three speakers and their teams for the work that they've done, because I think that these are really fantastic sets of studies. So we have a few minutes left for questions. Sorry, I tried to speak quickly, but probably not quickly enough.
So many thanks, David, for your interesting discussion, and then also for being here for us to discuss our symposium. And now I will open for some questions. So we have a few minutes.
So I just have a general question, specifically like after David talked about the next directions and in relation to the systematic review. So thank you so much for all the interesting talks. So what do you think an intervention could look like? Like you talked about like if we know the relation between these grammar and mathematical achievement, or if we further go down, which kind of mathematical achievement? Is it more procedural or is it more conceptual? And so my question is, I know it's really early at this point because we do not know the links, but what do you think an intervention using both grammar and math might look like in elementary school?
Okay. Is it okay if I answer, Alexander? The question is about intervention. So are you talking about children with mathematical difficulties or with language difficulties? Because mathematical difficulties, I cannot say very much because I'm not familiar with intervention in mathematics, but with respect to children with developmental language impairment, I think, for example, if we follow this this trend or this line that receptive syntax, for example, turns to be decisive, then it tells us maybe that we can focus in speech therapy, for example, more on receptive syntax, for example, complex constructions, yeah, so that if children really are trained with complex sentences, then maybe they get better along and at school, and they can understand the instructions by teachers, and maybe this helps also for mathematical success. This would be one example, yeah. And for morphology, mathematical language, maybe these are also strong connections. Maybe we can train children in these kind of mathematical language, maybe. Yeah, this could help.
We have a couple studies training children's math language using picture books that have translated to also improving their numeracy skills. Even though we explicitly only taught mathematical language terms through the books, there was a transfer effect to numeracy skills.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
And then Lynn Fuchs also has some work integrating language comprehension and math instruction that has shown important benefits.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
I can see one hand more for a question. Katrin?
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for the interesting talk. I had one question because I was thinking about a famous mathematician that I know, I mean a physicist actually, Richard Feynman. I don't know, probably the name is well known usually, but he was pretty well known to actually have a pretty bad grammar skills. He didn't like English, and I think that like it might be possible that you have very high mathematical skills without having very high grammar skills. And I was wondering, how could you explain that? Because I felt like you would see that one supports the other, but it might actually, I don't know. I was wondering what your reactions would be on this question.
Can I answer that question?
Yes, of course. You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, the mathematics and for my study, I was focusing on the mathematical notation. I hypothesize that the notation of mathematical expression shares using the syntactic processing as language, but I think that Oh, I'm not sure if the notation, maybe the notation of mathematical expression and mathematical processing or like calculation itself may be processed in a different way. I mean, if we write down mathematical expression, I think that we are using language skills. But if without writing down the mathematics in the written format, maybe that it is possible that mathematical thinking, there's this independent component in the mathematical thinking from language.
So does this answer your question, Katrin?
Yeah, I think so. I'll have to think about it, but I guess so. Yeah. Thanks.
I see one hand more.
Yeah, hi. So first of all, thank you. It was really interesting talks. And if maybe I can add to Katrin's question, I think we see sometimes people who have difficulties at particular areas of math, although they might be excellent mathematicians. So it doesn't have to be like one unitary ability math, and maybe the answer can lie somewhere there. And then the things I wanted to say and to ask are also about that. I think one thing is not a question, is something I just wanted to add is I think it's fascinating the connections you show between language and mathematics, and you were talking mostly about algebra. I think there are other aspects of mathematics which could also be related to math. First of all, the very basic thing could be just the ability to say numbers, which is literally a part of language, although it's not the same. So I think I would add those kinds of things to the equation. And specifically with respect to the relation between language and algebra, I apologize, I missed the first few minutes of the symposium, so maybe you said it there, but is there, we know that there are relations between syntactic relations between math and non-math and language. Do you think that these are the strongest relations? I mean, that the relation between language and math are mostly syntactic, or also in other aspects of language and math, like more conceptual, phonological processing, or that David was mentioning also. I think that you mentioned phonological awareness, or it was in one of the talks.
I would say it depends on the task. So if you're a little child and you're learning the numbers, as you said, you need vocabulary skills, for example, and phonological skills. But if you're going on and starting to do first mathematical operations, you need other tasks, like, as we said, for comparing numbers, you seem to need grammatical skills. So it depends on the task and also on the age, I think, if you're talking about children or talking about adults. So it's a very complex question, and you have to consider a lot of other factors. If you're learning math, or if you're doing math, if you're learning math, or if you're doing math, it's maybe also a different area. What skill you need?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So what was really interesting was especially grammar, because we are really wondering of the behavioral results that children with low math skills decrease in grammar skills. So in children with low language skills, partially catching up with the other groups. And this was our thinking, if there's perhaps an underlying understanding of rules, for example. And the other study, which was also mentioned from Eva and Alexander from Joe, also show nearly the same results like we have found based on the big German panel study. And so Tomoya for the adults also more the syntax. And this is why we are thinking what is really the explanation of this. And this was also the motivation for this symposium. So perhaps if grammar play a very special role in all these languages, which has, of course, an influence on different maskings.
Yeah, I understand. I think it could also perhaps be the importance of grammar itself in each of the domains, even separately, not just the relations. So we know from, we do some studies on reading and writing numbers, so we know that the major difficulty there is usually grammatical. When people have difficulty in saying or reading numbers or writing them, it's about grammar. And also in language, I know that grammar is a big deal. It's a big source of difficulty. So maybe this could be one of the reasons why the grammar is a good explanatory factor for the relations between math and language.
Yes, I think this is really true, because grammar is kind of a proxy of the entire language development, and so we wanted to show this by adding the study with the very young children, these late talkers, with very early grammatic abilities, who show that they have problems in math later, and it's not vocabulary who determines that. So there again, it's really grammar is a proxy for the entire language, and yeah, this explains some findings.
Okay, cool. It was very interesting anyway, thank you.
So are there more questions? Okay, if not, then I'd like to thank you for joining us and for your interest, and I really appreciate our symposium and also the interesting discussion at the end. And do you have again your hand, or is it just from before, Tor?
Oh no, sorry, I forgot to put it in.
Okay, then I think I like to wish all of you good afternoon or good day, so it depends where you are. And really thank you for being here, and see you perhaps in the next slide of the MCLS, or perhaps in presence at the MCLS next year. Okay, so bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Nurit.
Bye.